So welcome to Wine and Wisdom / Torah and Tequila for Parshat Yisro. This week is the Parshat of Yisro or Jethro. And tonight's class is titled Lift Your Hands Above Your Head, Reaching the Pinnacle of Human Achievement and Beyond. And today we're going to talk about going outside of the box. Specifically, we're going to talk about going outside of what we consider us. And I'm excited for tonight's lesson. I'm also excited to begin tonight's lesson with a video. This video will also open up the, we'll do two things. It will hopefully set the tone for the lesson. It will also set the tone for who the lesson is, L'ilui Nishmat. Tonight's lesson I will be sponsoring. It's always $54 to sponsor Wine and Wisdom. Don't always announce who the sponsor is, but it's usually sponsored. And tonight's class will be sponsored in loving memory of Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that this past Sunday, Rabbi Twersky passed away.
Pioneer.
Yes, a pioneer in many fields, specifically in Jewish recovery, Jewish mental health, and this field. And the video that we're going to play is both immediately on target for it's going to set the tone for what we're going to talk about today. And it will also be him speaking. So please direct your attention to the video screen. Hopefully I can get it to go smoothly. All right. And
there's something I want to tell you about the stress and how we apply stress. Okay. And I think it's an important thing because many people have told me from my lectures it's the one thing they remember, okay? I was sitting in a dentist's office and looked at an article that said, how do lobsters grow? Well, I don't care how lobsters grow. But I was interested in it. And it points out that a lobster is a soft, mushy animal that lives inside of a rigid shell. That rigid shell does not expand. Well, how can the lobster grow? Well, as the lobster grows, that shell becomes very confining, right? And the lobster feels itself under pressure and uncomfortable. It goes under a rock formation to protect itself from predatory fish, casts off the shell, and produces a new one. Well, eventually, that shell becomes very uncomfortable as it grows, right? Back under the rocks. And the lobster repeats this numerous times. The stimulus for the lobster to be able to grow is that it feels uncomfortable. Right? Now, if lobsters had doctors, they would never grow, because as soon as the lobster feels uncomfortable, goes to the doctor, gets a Valium, gets a Percocet, feels fine, never gets off its shell. So I think that we have to realize that times of stress are also times that are signals for growth. And if we use adversity properly, we can grow through adversity.
all right, some pretty powerful stuff. If I may say so, and welcome to Buzz. As I mentioned, Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky passed away this past Sunday. And that specific, I don't know what it is. I have no idea. I was sent this video a day or two ago, and as I was preparing the lesson, I was like, this would be perfect to start off the lesson. And I don't know when, I would imagine it's from some interview from one of his recovery retreats or something along those lines.
Yeah, I mean, that's been circulating for like 10 years.
I'm sure. It's not a new video. He didn't look like that right before he passed away.
Yeah.
But the point that he's making is so on target. And again, Rabbi Twersky used to run these recovery retreats according to Torah. You can watch them online. You can search Rabbi Dr. Abraham J. Twersky. You can read some of his books. It's all recovery, from a Jewish perspective, because Judaism and the Torah has what to say about everything, as we know. And he specifically specialized in, he was a rabbi and by doctor, he was a PhD. I think he was a psychologist. And he really merged these two fields together, and some of his books are amazing. So I highly recommend you check them out. In general, some of you know that I love to say that I think that every Jew is really an addict at a certain level. Not just Jew, every person is an addict at a certain level. We all have things that kind of bring us down and that we get addicted to, whether that's just addicted to our own temptations, even if it's not specifically a substance or something like that. We all have that part of us. And I encourage you to check his stuff out. Anyways, but putting that aside, as we mentioned, tonight's lesson will be in his memory, Rabbi Twersky, who passed away this past Sunday.
Twersky?
Rabbi Twersky?
Yeah, Rabbi Abraham J. Twersky. We just watched a clip. Sorry, welcome. First of all, welcome, Frida. Welcome,
no reason
Ali.
I'm late. I'm sorry.
Good to see you. No worries. So what you missed was we played a 1.5-minute clip, and I mentioned that I was going to sponsor tonight's class in memory of Rabbi Twersky, who just passed away this past Sunday. And the clip that he mentioned set the tone for tonight's lesson. So what are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, but you forgot the most important part. You started talking about tequila, which makes me think of Allie because she helped.
Oh gosh, do we have to redo the whole past 8 minutes for Ali? Ali, just to recap really quickly, there are some people drinking wine, some people drink whatever it is. I'm drinking tequila tonight because Melina convinced me that tonight should be tequila and Torah.
Oh, I should go get my bottle of tequila.
Okay, but please, if you don't mind, I'm going to make tonight much more about the wisdom and the Torah, and whatever you're drinking will be whatever you're drinking. Some people are drinking water, tea, I know, etc. Okay. That being said, that video of Rabbi Twersky is where he speaks about lobsters and brings lobsters as an analogy, but we all know this idea to be true, right? We're all familiar with this concept that when we feel most squeezed, when we feel most, uncomfortable, there's a YouTube channel called Yes Theory. Has anybody ever seen them? Just me? Am I dating myself here as the youngest I'm not the youngest on the Zoom tonight.
Probably.
But there is a YouTube channel called Yes Theory. I don't highly recommend them. They're really just entertainment. But their tagline is phenomenal. I love their tagline. That's kind of what drew me to them, which is seek discomfort. They look for uncomfortable situations. Why? Because we all know that if we're uncomfortable, and I don't mean in your bed. If you're uncomfortable in your bed, get a new mattress. But if you're uncomfortable in life, probably there's some sort of growth that's going to come out of it. Certainly, if it's more of a general discomfort in general in life, that's for sure going to lead to some sort of growth that's going to come out of that. And that's what Rabbi Twersky is mentioning. That the lobsters, the way they are, is they wait, and when their shell is too much, they know it's time to get rid of the shell, go beyond their shell, and grow a new shell. And that's how they grow. And that's a very powerful lesson for us. And that's going to be the topic of tonight's lesson, breaking out of our shell, breaking out of our box, going beyond, beyond the day-to-day grind, or it's not so much day-to-day grind. It's beyond whatever we're comfortable doing now. We all know there are certain things we're comfortable doing now that we weren't comfortable 10, 15 years ago. Whatever it is, whether you became a parent in those 10, 15 years, then you're now, we're never really comfortable being parents, but that's okay. But you're now okay with being a parent. Beforehand, you were like super anxious about it, right? If you have, whatever it is, right? If you hadn't bought a house and now you bought a house, you're more comfortable with that now and you were super anxious beforehand. And we all know that uncomfortability, that anxiety, that stress leads to further growth. And that's
Teshuvah.
Come again?
Becoming about Teshuvah.
Yes, absolutely. Growing in Judaism. But the reason I didn't mention that one, Ali, is because growing in Judaism is going to be the main topic we're going to talk about today. So it's not an analogy. That's the actual topic. All right. That being said, let's open up with some verses from this week's Parsha, from this week's Torah portion. Where is it? Hold on. There it is. Come again?
No, I was telling Kennedy to check it.
Yes, I agree. Kennedy should be sheket. We didn't hear her. So where were we? Here we are. So text 1 is from this week's Parsha, and this week's Parsha is called Yisro or Jethro because there is a man who's introduced in this week's Parsha, and he is none other than Moses' father-in-law. Excuse me. He's introduced at the beginning of this week's Parsha as the first convert to Judaism, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. Let's see. Malka, can I ask you to unmute and to read for us text 1, please?
Disappeared. Oh, there it is.
Malka?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go for it.
Okay, except
There's a black box.
Put on the black box.
box.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is it gone now?
Nope.
No.
Now it is.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, except
Out of focus.
it's out of focus.
I must have done something wrong because this is not usually, the sheet is usually much better.
And
than
also, Zushi, I'm on my phone, not my computer, so it's really hard to read.
it's a little more difficult for you. Okay,
Yes.
no problem. So Marilyn, if we could ask you to read, and hopefully I could get the shear to work. It was working before. I don't know what happened. Hold on. Let's close this. Hopefully that will help. maybe I'm just trying to do too much on the computer at once because I had that video and I decided to make the class a little bit more exciting. So this is what happens. I get to pay for it, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna go see if I have my book because the screen's really hard to read.
Okay, go ahead. Hold on, and now let's try again. I closed some things in the background, so hopefully that should help. Okay.
Not too good.
Hold on. We're getting there.
What page are you on?
Is that a little better?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Marilyn, if you can please read for us text 1, which is from this week's Parsha, where we are introduced to Moses' father-in-law, Yisro.
Now Moses' father-in-law, Yithro, the Cohen of Midian, heard all that God had done for Moses and for Israel, his people, and that God had taken Israel out of Egypt. Now Moses' father-in-law, Yithro, and Moses' son and his wife came to Moses to the desert where he was encamped to the mountain of God. Moses told his father-in-law about all that God had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians on account of Israel, about all the hardships that had befallen them on the way, and that God had saved them. Yithro was happy about all the good that God had done for Israel, that he had rescued them from the hands of the Egyptians. Thereupon Jethro said, "Blessed is God, who has rescued you from the hands of the Egyptians and from the hand of Pharaoh, and who has rescued the people from beneath the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that God is greater than all the deities, for with the thing that they plotted, he came upon them." Then Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings to God, and Aaron and all the elders of Israel came to dine with Moses' father-in-law before God.
Okay, so in this week's parasha, we're introduced to a character called Yisro. Who is Yisro? Yisro is Moses' father-in-law. And Yisro has a rich background story, okay? What is his background story? So in text 2, we get a little bit of the background. Hold on, there we go. Okay, so I think I figured out what was wrong. I think now it should work.
Better.
Right, exactly. Okay, so Phil, can you read for us, please?
Kohen of Midian. Rabbi Yehoshua says he was a priest. Rabbi Elazar says he was a minister.
Okay, 2 different discussions about exactly what it means when the Torah says he was a Kohen of Midian. One opinion is that he was a priest. Another one was that he was a minister. By the way, there's one opinion that he tried out every other religion in the world. I don't know how many of you have heard this, but that he tried out every other religion in the world before converting to Judaism, which says something about Judaism. In any event, he was certainly a minister, a high-ranking officer in his town, etc. And then, of course, famously, he converts to Judaism. As a little bit of as a result of the fact that Moses was his son-in-law and was leading this new religion, etc. Ali, can you read for us, please, this Rashi? This is a Rashi text 3 on this particular verse. Go ahead.
Sure can. Yisro, he was called by 7 names: Ruel, Jether, Jethro, Hobab, Heber, Kenny, and Putiel. He was called Jether or Yetzer because he caused a section to be added to the Torah, namely, "But you shall choose." Okay.
So 1 second. I can clarify that. That's fine. So the word Yeter, which is one of the 7 names that Yisro, Moses' father-in-law, was called by, is the same root word. In other words, if you analyze what the word is, Yeter means to add. And he's called this because he added a section to the Torah. Which section? The section that starts with the words, "But you shall choose," which for those of you that are familiar, in this week's parasha, in this week's Torah portion, Yisro, Moses' father-in-law, comes, and like they say in Yiddish, Agasta Rabayel Zetef Hamayel. They say that somebody who comes as a newcomer sees things with fresh eyes, and he can give advice. So he starts to give advice about the judging, about exactly how Moses used to judge the people, etc. So that's why he's called Yeter. Okay, keep going. Why was he called Yitro?
He was called Yitro to indicate that when he converted and fulfilled the commandments, a letter was added to his name.
Okay. So one more letter was added when he converted to Judaism. All right, next.
That's to Yitro. Okay. He was called Hobab, which means lover, because he loved Tibara, the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Hobab was indeed Yitro, as it is said of the children of Hobab, Moses' father-in-law.
Okay, so Yitro had a rich background. He was a man who pursued every religion in the world. He was a man who was a minister in his town. He was a man who even added a section to the Torah because of his wisdom and his great ability. And yet he chooses to convert to Judaism. And that fact, that such a figure chooses to turn his life around, is going to end up being a very, very big deal. Let's turn to the Zohar, who's going to share with us just 1 second. Hold on. Yeah, this was such a major deal that the Zohar, which is one of the more mystical parts of the Torah, shares with us that the Jewish people were only ready to receive the Torah at Sinai once Yitro came. Until Yitro came, until Moses' father-in-law converted to Judaism, they were still missing one piece of the puzzle in order to receive the Torah. Let's read about this in the Zohar. Marguerite, can I ask you to read for us? I don't know if you're there. Simcha Bracha. Oh, there she is. You read for us?
I'm here.
Go for it.
Can you hear me? Okay.
We hear you perfectly.
Yeah. Jethro, the greatest of all pagan priests, arrived and swore be filthy to God, stating, "Now I know that God is greater than all the deities." At that moment, God's glory was resplendent in both the greatest heights and lowest realms. Thereafter, God gave a perfect Torah that reigns supreme over all else.
Okay. And now the question becomes, why? What was so amazing about Yitro, turning around and becoming from someone who pursued every other religion in the world, and someone who was a minister in his town, and someone who was so wise, and he comes and embraces Judaism? What was so amazing about that? I mean, to be honest, he was Moses' father-in-law. It was also a little bit of just a good move for him to do, like if he wanted to keep the family together, like what's so fundamental about that we couldn't receive the Torah, literally the Torah, before that happened?
Because it made a big impact.
I was just going to open for discussion. So perfect. Ali, go for it. What do you think?
Because it made a big impact that he chose that on the Jewish people. He was the first one to consciously just decide to do it. I think it made a big spiritual impact on everything, is what I've always remembered.
So here, I guess here's my question. The Torah in general, at this class, we share this all the time. The word for the Torah in Hebrew is called Torah, right? Torah means not history book, even though the Torah is a history book. It doesn't mean book of laws, even though the Torah is a book of laws. It doesn't mean any of the other things that Torah is. So which word do we choose? Torah means to show, to instruct. It's a book of instruction, right? It's supposed to show us the way and teach us the way. I guess here's my question. What are we supposed to learn from Yitro? And it's so important that it's supposed to precede our approach to learning Torah and to receiving the Torah, which we do all the time, right? Which we're constantly remarrying God and receiving the Torah, etc., as we mentioned very often. So what is so necessary? What is this pre-step, this prerequisite that's needed before that, which is Yitro? And I guess most importantly, my question is, Yitro was a convert. If I was born Jewish and I can't convert, right, so I can't convert to Judaism, what exactly am I supposed to be doing? Anybody else have any input here?
Don't we still choose the Torah every year? Don't we still choose to?
For sure. And maybe that's the lesson here.
Hey, Zushi, I got some.
Let's see.
Well, as a newcomer, I think that a man who has seen and walked different paths, and then wholeheartedly, with all his wisdom and worldly knowledge, chooses Judaism and to receive the Torah, I think that has impact. Not someone who has been born, raised, and lived this life, but goes, yes, this is the one for me. I think it's very inspirational.
Okay. I loved what you said. I think that's a very, very strong point. I'm going to take big issue with your opening statement, which is as a newcomer. Okay, because I think you were starting off by almost saying like, see, I'm like the Yitro in this conversation, and that's not true, because in today's day and age, every Jew was really, we're taught that every neshama, every soul was at Sinai, right? That's why one of the Jewish dating websites is called Saw You at Sinai. Every Jew's neshama was there, and so therefore, Buzz, you're just as new to all of this as all of us. You're on this journey together with all of us. So even though this might be your first time in this class, you're not a newcomer. But your point was amazing, which is that perhaps Yitro's, and I mentioned this briefly when I shared that Yiddish saying, "A gast havayel zet hamayel," which means that a guest for a while sees for a mile, or in short, when someone comes with a fresh pair of eyes, they say something. In other words, perhaps Yitro's value here is the fact that he comes and he says, look, I've tried a lot of other religions. This is it. This is the truth. Perhaps.
I would argue with that.
Okay, let's hear.
I mean, that sort of dumbs it down to logic. In other words, he said that this religion doesn't work for me, and this one is logical, so I accept it. You have to accept Yiddishkeit whether it makes sense to you or not.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you, Kalman, for sharing that. Okay. I was hoping, and I couldn't have scripted this better, I was hoping these 2 points would come up here. Okay? Because this is exactly what we're going to talk about today. All right? We're going to talk about the conflict of like Yitro being the man who maybe understands Judaism most, like Buzz pointed out, right? He's the man who knows everything else, right? You know how often people tell me, you were born into the religion, you were born religious, you don't really know what this religion is all about, you were just born religious, so therefore you just do it because you were born into it. And there's a certain validity to that. Someone who is a Baal Teshuvah, someone who didn't keep Torah mitzvahs and now chooses to do that, that's a very powerful point. But as Kalman mentioned, the flip side to that is they're doing it because they appreciate the beauty of it, which is all rooted in our minds. A relationship with the divine, a relationship with God should at least to some degree supersede our minds. So I think that's two sides of the coin that we have here, right? Our faith cannot be based on our own minds. Otherwise, the moment that our mind says, all right, this part of God I don't understand, then I don't believe in God anymore. That's ridiculous. That means you really just believe in your own mind. You don't believe in God, right?
That's why we have the two kinds of mitzvot. There's
100%. And that's exactly
and
the ones that we understand.
Follow.
Absolutely. The mitzvahs that we understand and the mitzvahs that are above our understanding. And that's two different sides to Judaism, 100%. And we're going to choose to, so we're going to talk about these two sides, and we're going to talk about the approach to them, and we're going to do so through a really random concept in Judaism. There's been a lot of talk over the past year, I guess, since COVID began, about personal space. In fact, I don't think, to the best of my knowledge, that there has ever been a uniformly suggested amount of space that is personal space. Any other Seinfeld fans in the crowd? Please identify yourselves. Thank you. Good. Thank you, Beth. I appreciate that. There's a Seinfeld episode, I forgot what it's called, but one of the characters there is like doesn't respect personal space, is always like in his face. Does anybody else know what I'm talking about? I don't remember the details of it. I watched it years ago. And like she's always like talking to you like right here, like right here. And of course we all knew that there's some sort of there's a concept of personal space, and and you shouldn't get too close to me, etc. Right? Like when we talk to each other, like if I'm smelling your what you had for lunch, we got an issue, right? But here, over the past year, we've literally come up with a number. We've said 6 feet. That's the magic number. And I understand that's not really personal space. That's obviously a particular airborne, very deadly virus that transfers through air particles. I get it. So it's not maybe once COVID is over and everybody's vaccinated and we got herd immunity and everything, which God willing may it be speedily in our days, then we'll go back not to 6 feet. It'll be whatever, a foot or 2 feet or whatever the normal amount is. But for whatever reason, there's no such concept in the legal world. In other words, let's think, for instance, about I guess like let's talk about sexual harassment or workplace ethics or that kind of thing. You'll hear people talk a lot about inappropriate touch, inappropriate speech even. You'll never hear somebody talk about inappropriate spatial proximity. You know what I mean? Come again?
I mean, I do. I feel like maybe that's because I try and practice Shomer Nagia, but like even when I didn't, like it definitely comes up when somebody's overbearing or something.
Whoa. I didn't say we don't feel that way or that we don't, maybe we even talk about it. There's no legality to it. You cannot bring somebody, you cannot come to human resources and say, my coworker, I feel like they were sexually harassing me because they were only 6 inches away from me and not 16 inches away from me. You can't do that. There is no legality to that.
But you could go to HR and say, this person has been harassing me and making me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you would list out would be the fact that this person gets way too close for comfort.
100%. And it could be a general vibe. No problem.
In a very corporate
no problem. But when it comes down to the legalities of it, there is no legality of how much space.
Correct.
Okay. And in Torah law, this is where I was getting. If you look at halacha in Jewish law, there absolutely is. And this is where we're getting. Okay, so let's introduce it. Text 5 is the source. Melina, can you read this for us? Nice short one.
Jesus.
It's got to be short for Melina.
Okay, 4 moats surrounding a person are considered his or her personal space.
Okay, so this is a very interesting concept. This is from a student of Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, who's a Rishon. His name was sorry, I forgot. They don't bring down his name, but he wrote a sefer called the Shita L'Moed Katan. Either way, this is the source. Well, I don't know if it's the source, but it's spoken about a lot in the Talmud, etc. What is the number for personal space? Okay, the magic number is 4 amot, 4 cubits. Now, for those of you in the crowd that are wondering how large a cubit is, there's disagreement about it. It's somewhere between 18 and 24 inches. Okay, so 4 amot is somewhere between 4.5, and 6 feet.
No.
All right,
6 feet.
Literally on the nail as to what we've come up with today for how far we need to be in order not to
Go
get the letters.
figure.
What was that?
Go figure.
Go figure. Yes.
It's already in the Torah.
Now, the Torah is not talking about spreading disease, but this applies in many other scenarios. Okay, let's go through them one at a time. We'll try to do them at least fairly quickly. Ali, you want to read for us this one? The text 6 is Maimonides talking about acquiring something. So let's say there's something in the public domain. It's just hanging out on Walnut Street and somebody lost it and you want to acquire it. You want to make it yours. So do you have to pick it up? The answer is no. Go ahead, Ali.
A person's courtyard can acquire property for him without his being aware of it. Thus, if a lost object falls into a person's courtyard, he acquires it. Similarly, the area within a radius of 4 cubits next to the place where a person is standing can acquire property for him like his own courtyard. If a lost object comes into these 4 cubits, he acquires it. Our sages ordained this convention so that people who discover lost articles should not come to strife. When is this convention employed? In an alleyway or at the sides of the public domain, which are not crowded with many people, or in a field that is ownerless. When, however, a person stands in the public domain or in a field belonging to a colleague, the area within, I don't have any more.
The area within a radius of 4 cubits cannot acquire. Okay, probably something there was blocking. In any event, what he's saying here is as follows. Look, this doesn't apply in someone's private property. You go to someone else's field, someone else's, I don't know, house, and then you say, hey, that trophy that's on your mantelpiece, that Oscar that's on your mantelpiece, it's within my 4 cubits, my personal space, I acquire it, it's now mine. No, you don't get to say that. And even if it's a lost object that's ownerless, you don't get to say that. You also don't get to do this in the public domain, where everybody has equal rights to the area. But in like an alleyway or a semi-private, not private, but a semi-public space, so then if something is within your 4 amot, then it is now yours. Sorry, Melina, you have a question?
No, Zusha, I just wanted to make a comment that it's actually illegal to sell your Oscar. Like, even if you're
I knew you were gonna...
selling Oscar, it's illegal. You can't buy or sell Oscars. So that is just a rule of chumash that I don't think we...
I want to challenge.
No?
I want to challenge.
What was that, Fred? You want to challenge?
I want to challenge, yeah. There's a little known fact. If you win an Oscar, you can sell it back to the Academy for $1.
Yeah, I guess back to the Academy Pencil. Anyways, that being said, leaving the Oscars aside for a second, I didn't mean to derail the whole conversation.
Wait, but it did say that if it falls in my courtyard, I acquire it. That's my personal space.
Well, no.
No, it's like when Marlon Brando rejected the Oscar and he sent up Sasheen Littlefeather to get it for him.
Melina, you better be careful or I'm going to mute you.
Okay. Sorry. I'm going to mute myself. No, I'm going to.
Okay. So no, not because I have no interest in the Oscars, just because I think we owe it to the people here. Everybody gathered here tonight to hear Torah, not about the Oscars. So what we're saying here is that if you are in a semi-public space and there's a lost object, which means an ownerless object, which is within your space, or you walk into its sphere or somehow it enters your orbit, then it now becomes yours. This is not a biblical law. This is a rabbinic law. Let's see some more of the details here. Arnold, can you read for us, please?
Yes.
Hey, Arnold.
Yosef Ilan, can you read for us, please? Go ahead. No, now you're muted. You were unmuted, and then. Arnold, can you? Yeah, there you go. Go ahead.
That the four amot surrounding a person function as a kinyan does not have a scriptural root, or does not have scriptural roots. Nevertheless, inasmuch as the rabbis enacted that these four amot require objects, using the power of the courts to seize property, the rabbis transfer ownership of the actual space to the person standing besides it, like
Chatzer, which means the courtyard. Okay. I think we can move past this. We can move a little quicker through this. So this is in terms of acquirement. Stephanie, if you can please read for us text 8, where we see that the same thing applies to divorce. So Jewish law requires that in order for a man and woman to actually be separated, actually be divorced, a get has to be handed over to the woman, right? A bill of divorce has to be handed from the man to the woman. So it can't just be the man decides to give one, but the woman doesn't know about it. It actually the woman has to actually receive it. Now, what's if the woman is, let's say, I don't know, her hands are not, whatever, he throws it or something, and it doesn't actually come into her hand. So it turns out that her 4 cubits also work. Go ahead, Stephanie, text 8.
The following rules apply if a woman holds her hand at an incline, her husband throws it to her hand, and it falls to the earth. If it falls within 4 amots and where she is standing and comes to rest there, the divorce is effected.
Okay. So she, now obviously she can't be protesting. If she doesn't want her 4 amot to accept it, then it doesn't work. But here we're talking about where her hand is reached out to try to grab it. She didn't reach it, but it fell right next to her, so then that works. If there were 2 witnesses that saw that, they are now divorced. Let's keep going. Some more examples. Kalman, can you read for us? This is directly related to what we learned about last week. For those that remember, there's this law about Shabbos, about Shabbat, that if you exit the city, you're only allowed to walk 2,000 amot outside of the city. Now, let's say you went past that, and now you're outside in the red zone. This interesting law applies. Go ahead, Kalman.
One who fell asleep while traveling and didn't realize that Shabbat arrived is not allowed to travel further than 4 amot. Rabbi Elazar said he is in the center of those 4 amot.
Okay, so if you find yourself out in the middle of the desert, you're not in a city or anything, your space, the space that you are in, that you're keeping Shabbos, is considered 4 amot. By the way, carrying works like this too, right? Everybody knows about the prohibition of carrying on Shabbat. Mm-hmm. So there's 2 prohibitions of carrying on Shabbat. You're not allowed to take something from inside a private domain into a public domain, or a public domain into a private domain. But then there's also that on a public street, you're not allowed to walk for 4 amot. That measurement, 4 amot. But text 10, I think, is probably one of the most powerful. Okay, let's focus on text 10. Another example. Malka, can you read for us, please?
Okay, let me make it bigger.
Sorry.
One must not sit within the 4 amot of a person immersed in prayer, whether in front and back or to the sides. One must distance themselves 4 amot. Likewise, one must not pass within the 4 amot in front of a person immersed in prayer. This restriction is limited to the front of the praying person alone.
So this is another.
Not everyone knows this, by the way.
Not everybody knows this. No.
No.
Davening is an interesting concept, right? Davening is a time we're praying to God, whatever it is, morning prayer, evening prayer, afternoon prayer, whatever it is, right? And this is supposed to be a time when we're focused on God. And that's why we do it in a shul, and ideally not outside in a tent facing toms, which is what we've been doing these days at Chabad, for those of you that are familiar. And it can sometimes be very distracting. I can't tell you, I mean, I know some of you come to shul these days, some of you don't, but for those of you that have been, you know that sometimes we'll be in the middle of reading the Torah, and then Rabbi Pinnacle like pauses for like 10 seconds because some motorcycle with a youngster on it is zooming down Walnut Street. We have to pause. There's a reason why normally we don't do that. Obviously now for health reasons, right? That's not, but we daven indoors, inside a building, which is, you know, air conditioned, heating, acclimated to allow. And by the way, there's a lot of laws about the way a synagogue is built. Did you know this? Like, for instance, you will never find a synagogue that has windows on the eastern side. Did you know this?
Daven in front of a window.
Because you're not supposed to daven in front of a window. You certainly will not find any pictures on the eastern side, meaning like a picture of a person or a drawing or something like that. You will not find a mirror, certainly not. These are all very distracting things. That's not what we want to daven to, right? We want to daven to God, and whatever is at the front here should be encouraging us to daven towards God, right? So similarly, there are laws with regards to what we're not allowed to do in order not to distract the other people around us from davening. Okay? And how big is that personal space? How far is that personal space? 4 amot, or 4.5 to 6 feet.
It's great.
Very interesting stuff. So
what about the sides?
What?
I don't quite understand that Tzidehem doesn't apply.
In terms of what? In terms of davening specifically, or where?
Yeah, so it's not quite 4 amos all around. It's just front and back, but not the sides.
So no.
I thought it was all around.
You shouldn't sit within
in front
4
or back
of a person. Let me bring the text back up. Hold on.
Yeah, but it's interesting that the sides aren't part of that.
You shouldn't sit within 4 of a person immersed in prayer in front, back, or to the sides.
No.
No. So when you're standing or passing by is different than sitting. Okay? Now, by the way, I believe that the law is that if you are also davening, you can be in closer proximity because you're enhancing the davening. If you're part of a minyan, right, you're all davening together, that's fine. We're talking about somebody sitting and playing Game Boy. You know what I mean?
We're walking in front, right? Like if somebody's davening.
So, now, when it comes to walking is specifically in front. Because if you're walking behind them, presumably you're not distracting them.
Yeah.
Okay. Either way, we could sit and get nitty-gritty about this, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want to point out that this is one where literally you see the personal space concept. Another area, by the way, I'll just quote it here, also from Shulchan Aruch, also from the Jewish Code of Law, is another law which goes as follows. I have it here in Hebrew. I'll quote it as best as I can. This is talking about if a Torah scholar or someone, a very respected rabbi, a very respected person walks in, you're supposed to stand kind of in their honor. How close do they need to get? It's only once they get within 4 amot of you, then you should stand up sort of in reverence for them. By the way, one more random, this could get exhaustive, by the way. This 4 amot is brought up all the time in Jewish law, but let me do one more. One more is, you may be familiar with the concept that if you daven in the same shul all the time, you should try to have a designated spot to daven. That designated spot is not literally the inches, make sure that you're literally in the same chair, in the same place, in the same spot in the shul every single time. 4 amot is the radius. Okay? So 4 to 6 feet, or 4.5 to 6 feet is the radius of where we should be. But here's where I really want to get with this. Where does this all come from? What is the source of this special radius, right? Whether it's when it comes to acquiring something, ownership, laws of marriage and divorce, laws of Shabbat, laws of respecting elders, laws of respecting Torah scholars, laws of davening, laws of respecting other people's places of davening. What is the source of these 4 amot? So for this, we need to go to the Talmud. Let me just see who hasn't read yet.
Is this Rabbanim or is this like from the Torah? Is this?
So we're about to see right here. We're about to see what the source of it is. Some of those laws that we just mentioned are rabbinical. Some of them that we mentioned are biblical. Yeah. So, but what is the source? Where does this magical number 4 amot come from, right? I'm sure many of you have thought about this in regards to the 6 feet, right? So I'll tell you, the 6 feet for social distancing, that comes from science. How far we feel that particles can fly, et cetera. And it's probably not 6 feet. It's probably more like 4.5 feet. But they probably told us 6 feet because they know that if they tell us 6 feet, we're going to do 4 feet. So it's probably based on something like that. But when it comes to the Torah, obviously, we need a biblical source. In the Torah, where does this come from? So Ron is going to share for us this Talmudic excerpt, text 11, from the Talmud and Tractate Eruvin. Ron Rohr, if you can, please.
What is the scriptural source for the 4 amot within which a person is always permitted to walk on Shabbat? As it was taught, the verse states, remain every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. Meaning one must restrict movement to an area equal to his place. And how much is the area of his place? A body typically measures 3 amot, and an additional amah is needed to allow him to spread out his hands and feet. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says a person's body measures 3 amot, and an additional amah is needed in order to allow him to pick up an object from under his feet and place it by his head.
So we got, you need to have enough space for a person and for that person to stretch above their head. Okay, Google. Okay, Google. What is the average height of a human being?
Male is on average 175 centimeters tall, and female is on average 160 centimeters tall.
Let me just see that in inches. I can give that to you guys. Men are 5.7 feet, and females are 5.2 feet. That's the average height. How much did we say an amma is? Somewhere between 4.5 and 6 feet. So where does that number come from? That number comes from the average human being, okay? Let's give them 5 feet, whatever it is, plus, so by the way, the constant of that is for them to be able to lie down on the floor end to end, right? So let's say 5 feet, plus to be able to stretch your hands above your head. Okay, now that's a strange origin for a number. I don't get it. If you tell me the size of a human being, that makes sense. What is a person's personal space? If a person can lie down, that's your personal space. However tall you are, laying down makes sense. Where does the hands being stretched above your head come from? Why would we need to stretch our arms above our head? The answer is, and I want you to pay close attention to this because this is going to be the crux of the entire lesson. The answer is that lifting our hands above our head is the entire purpose of being human. And as such, it must be included in the count of the 4 amot. What do I mean by that? Okay, can we do a little exercise? Anybody up for standing up? You guys have all been sitting for way too long. Everybody stand up. Stretch your hands above your head. All right, let's do it. Stretch your hands above your head. Okay, keep them stretched. Now I want you to really stretch and get a little more. Every single one of you was able to do a drop more, even though Stephanie, I noticed, didn't get up. And Brett, I'm happy that you didn't get up. Because...
called out Stephanie.
She was writing down. She was writing down notes. That's okay. And I noticed that Brett, you see, guys, this is like a Torah class and a wine tasting event and a Zumba all in one.
Hardly Zumba, but okay.
Okay. All right. Anyways, what is my point? The point of that exercise was that even though I told you all to stretch your hands above your head, there was a little more you were able to stretch, right? You were able to do a little more. But when you did that a little more, I heard a couple krachts, a couple ois. Why? Because either because you're not so fit, but we won't call anybody out on that, or because, it hurts. You're stretching a little bit out of your comfort zone. And that is precisely the idea that we're talking about here.
Why do we not do that initially? You know what I'm saying? Like, why is our
exactly
stretch not the max we can go?
That's exactly the question I want to ask tonight. In other words, let's talk about this. We said there are 4 amot, okay? 4 amot. That's what constitutes your personal space. If I were to ask any one of you, who are you? what are you? Some of you would talk about your thoughts, your mental capabilities. Some of you would talk about your emotions, your emotional capabilities. And some of you would talk about your accomplishments, the actions that you've done throughout your life. 3 categories signified by our head, our heart, and our legs. Okay, I understand. We do things beyond our legs, right? Now, these are the 3 amot of what we'll call the natural, the rational, the normal world. But then every once in a while, as human beings, we are gifted with the ability to take our hands and to stretch them above our head, to go beyond our actions, certainly beyond our emotions and beyond our intellect, to go above all that. And that is precisely what makes us a human being. Okay? Let's read this in the words of the Rebbe, and then we'll elaborate a little bit more if we can. Let's go back to the beginning here. I think, Phil, you were one of the first to read, right? Phil, can you read for us, please, text 12, which is the Rebbe explaining this idea.
Naturally, a person takes up the space of 3 amot, corresponding to the 3 umbrella parts of the body, namely the head, torso, and legs. According to the rules of creation, the head is the loftiest part of the person, then the torso, and finally the lowest part, the legs. In this scheme, the hands, which extend out of both sides of the torso, are lower than the head. It is each person's task to reach beyond the 3 amot designated to humanity in creation, to reach beyond the peak of what a human can naturally achieve, namely, beyond the head, the seat of reason. In other words, a person should use his or her reason, and instead of getting stuck in the parameters of that very power of reason, break free and engage in matters that are beyond what the head can reach on its own.
Some powerful stuff. So it turns out that human beings are the only ones that do this. There is no recorded occurrence of a computer or an animal or a plant or a rock not only existing and not only being comfortable with what it accomplishes in the world, but thinking to itself, hey, what lies beyond that? Why was the world created? Why am I here? Right? That ability, that sense of reasoning is reserved for the human being. And that is our responsibility in this world. So emotions, certainly we know that other creatures have them. Actions, very evident. Even mental capabilities, we can say that some creatures have them to a certain degree. Okay, certainly the human being is the most gifted of all. The human being has the most reasoning, the ability to rationalize, etc. But to think about something that's outside of our existence, to think about what might be higher than what we can understand, what might lie beyond our own existence, that's something that only human beings, if I may say so, not only are gifted with, but it's something that we're obsessed with. We spend a lot of time trying to figure this kind of stuff out. And this is precisely the point that we're talking about. And very soon we're going to bring it back to Yisro. Okay? Before we do so, this is a very exciting and very interactive class tonight. We have another video. So we're going to talk a little bit about the 4 sections of the Torah. And in order to introduce them, I found a really cool video on YouTube. Instead of me explaining Pshat, Remes, Drush, and Sod, this video will do it for you, that every part of the Torah, every word in the Torah, every letter in the Torah can be read on 4 levels. All right, here we go. And
human authors express themselves in their works, both directly and subtly, sometimes intentionally and always subconsciously. When we read a text, we can choose either to read the lines or to engage in more intricate analysis and read between the lines. The divine author of the Torah did something similar, but to an infinitely greater degree. God expressed himself in the text in multiple ways all at once, directly as well as subtly, with plenty of insinuation and a vast hidden layer of the divine subconscious. And he then instructed us to excavate it all. Jewish tradition separates these layers of understanding into 4 categories. The first is Pshat, direct intention, which is derived by examining context and syntax. For example, the Torah begins with the words, Bereshis bara Elokim, es hashemayim, ve'es haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. On the plainest level of Torah understanding, this is a straightforward statement of what happened at the beginning of time. But the simple meaning is not always easy to clarify. Many biblical commentators, most notably Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, the 11th century French scholar known universally as Rashi, devoted their efforts to clarifying the straightforward meaning of the often mysterious biblical texts. Our second layer of understanding is Rems Illusion. This refers to subtle communications that are encoded in the text. They can be uncovered using methods such as the numerical values of the Hebrew letters, the acronyms of words and phrases, or unusually sized letters in the Torah scroll. For example, the Torah's first two words, Bereshis bara, in the beginning, God created, carry the numerical value of 1,116. That's the identical value of the phrase Barosh Hashanah Nivra. It was created on Rosh Hashanah. We are thereby informed that Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of creation. Our third layer of understanding is drush, interpretive. Our sages extrapolate a vast corpus of ideas and instruction from the Torah's text through methods such as textual comparison, sequencing analysis, and homiletical interpretation. For example, from a sequencing perspective, the Torah begins with the wrong beginning. It describes creation, a narrative that is seemingly secondary to the Torah's primary function as a book of guidance that tells us how God expects us to act on a daily basis. The Torah should have dived directly into the nitty-gritty of the laws. On the interpretive level, however, the Torah first describes creation to tackle a major hurdle to Torah observance. The majority of Torah laws rely on the Jewish nation owning and settling the land of Israel. We were instructed to conquer the land and never relinquish our claim of ownership over it. But such a radical claim to a territory is bound to provoke opposition. Who gives us the right to take possession of a land and claim it as our eternal heritage? The Torah, therefore, begins with creation, clarifying that God is the creator of all territories, and he has the right to permanently bequeath a specific parcel to a particular people. It then records the history of God doing precisely that with the Jewish people. With this switch in sequence, the Torah supplies the Jews with the response God expects them to provide all who accuse them of land theft and occupation. The fourth layer of understanding is sod, hidden meaning. This refers to the deeply mystical messages that float behind every phrase and letter in the Torah. For example, the word Bereshis can be split perfectly into two words, bara shis, meaning he created six. God first formed the six emotive divine attributes, from chesed, kindness, through yesod, attachment, as described in Jewish mysticism. God then used these six attributes to create the actual universe. So there you have a sampling of the four layers of understanding that can be found in the Torah's very first words. Beyond this, a vast ocean of knowledge is contained in these same words. And beyond that stretches the infinite vastness of wisdom contained in the rest of the Torah's close to 80,000 words.
All right. So there you have a general overview of the three ways of looking at the Torah. Tonight, I want to specifically zone in on the fourth one. Okay, the fourth one, otherwise known as Sod, which is specifically the one with which we get to stretch beyond our reasoning. The other three are within our levels of reasoning, but Sod is way above our reasoning. And here, I'll ask, what did I just do? I don't know.
You gotta go full screen, I think.
Yeah, we were here.
But Sod is the hardest one. It's like Tanya.
Well, it's not just Tanya. It's a lot more than Tanya. But
No,
here,
it's hard like Tanya. It's for me.
oh, I know what I did wrong. Hold on. We got to do this. We just got to take that off. Now that's much better. Okay. So here, this is the Zohar describing why we would even start talking about sod. Why would we even get involved in it? And Ali mentioned it's very difficult. What can be accessed through sod? Sonia, can I ask you to read for us, please? Text 13. Go for it.
Come, look, what a person wears is visible to all, and only the foolish will look at a person with nice clothing and look no further. The body and its clothing are a metaphor for the body and soul. The Torah has a body, namely the mitzvot, which are very, quote, dressed up in the terms of our world, like a body and clothing. The foolish only look at the clothing, namely the stories of the Torah, and do not bother looking to see what lies behind the clothing. But those who know better do not suffice with looking at the clothing alone, rather at the body that lies underneath the clothing. The wise servants of the eternal King who stood at Mount Sinai looked only at the soul of Torah, the main part of Torah.
So the Zohar, thank you, Sonia. The Torah, the Zohar here is encouraging us through this analogy. Just like if I were to look at any human being, if I were to look at Kalman and say, oh, Kalman, he is the sum of who Kalman is his clothing. It would be ridiculous. Of course, Kalman is his amazing ideas that he contributes to society and his emotions and his body and his life and his everything that there is about Kalman. But to not look beyond the clothing is ridiculous. Similarly, says the Zohar, only a fool would look at the Torah and not through the Torah see God. Unfortunately, though, throughout the eras, throughout the ages, there have been many people who did study Torah in this manner. They studied Torah completely unaware that there might be a Nosei HaTorah, that there's someone who gave the Torah. One random example that literally just popped into my head is the Greeks, right? We know that with the Hanukkah story, they had no problem with the Jews studying Torah. The problem was believing that this is a divine book. That was the problem. They allowed the Jews to study Torah, at least at the beginning. They allowed the Jews to study Torah and study like a wisdom, just like all of the wisdoms. So if it doesn't hold a candle to Euclid or whoever, then it goes, that's it, over. But the fact that Jews consider this to be divine and consider this to be something given to us by God, that's what they didn't like. But that seems to be a tall order. How do we access the godly part of the Torah? And that, my friends, is something that God had in mind and placed as a part of the process of studying Torah from the very beginning when he gave the Torah. Marilyn, can you please read for us text 14? This is from the Medrash. This is an analogy for the giving of the Torah.
To what is the matter analogous? To a king who decreed the people of Rome cannot descend to Syria, and the Syrians cannot ascend to Rome. So too, when God created the world, he decreed the heavens belonged to God and the earth was given to humans. When God gave the Torah, he abolished the decree, stating, those below shall climb above, and those above shall descend below.
Thank you, Marilyn. And God put inside the Torah a way for us to access God himself. By struggling through Torah, we can actually reach that fourth dimension. What is the critical move? The critical move is that we have to be willing to climb above. Hashem says, I'll meet you. I'll come down. But you got to reach above. You got to stretch. You got to go out of your comfort zone. You got to be willing to go above the rational. You got to be able to be willing to go above what you know as life. And this, my friends, is what was so special about Yisro. Yisro was a man who had already reached the pinnacle, the epitome of whatever it meant to be a man at that point. The first three amos, check, right? He was at the height of intellect. He was at the height of emotions. He was even at the height of actions. He was considered a priest. He was considered a minister. He was considered a leader. He was an amazing, he was even wealthy, by the way. He had reached the pinnacle of everything that life had to offer. The one thing he hadn't tried was stepping outside of his comfort zone and stretching towards God, going above his rationale, going above what he knew as life and going towards God in that way. And this is such a powerful point. Where do we see this in Yisro's life? Take a look at the words of that Rashi, the Rashi where we say that Yitro came. Arnold, can you read this for us, please? Text 15.
Jethro heard. What news did he hear that made such an impression that he came? The splitting of the Red Sea and the war with Amalek.
So this is a fairly simple question. It looks like it, right? It says Vayishma Yitro, that Yitro heard about something, and then he came to meet the Jews. And that's the beginning of this week's parsha. Isn't that a silly question? What did he hear? What do you mean, what did he hear? The Jews just left Egypt. There were 10 plagues. They left. They came to the Red Sea. The Red Sea split before them. All the Egyptians drowned. They fought Amalek. A miraculous victory. What do you mean? What did he hear? What do you mean? What did he hear? So the Rebbe points out that you know what's going on here. Rashi wants to know. I get it. He heard all those things. All that suffices to make him convert. My question is, what made him move? In Yiddish, that we say, sultan. What made him move? What made him actually go beyond his comfort zone and say, I can't stay in my comfort zone, in my Dalit Amos. I can't stay within my realm, my personal space, and reach God. I have to go out of my personal space. I have to move. What was it that did that? And by the way, in the original talk, which this class is based on from the Rebbe actually explains exactly what the splitting of the Red Sea accomplished by him and what the war with Amalek accomplished him, etc. But this is beyond the scope of today's lesson. We're just going to, because that's what made him move. And that it's certainly an important point, etc. But here I just want to talk about the very fact that he moved. The very fact that what did that inspire him to do? It inspired him to say, 3 amos is not enough. I need that 4th. I need to stretch beyond my comfort zone. That's what Yisro did. Ron, can you bring it home for us? These are the words of the Rebbe, where the Rebbe explains this idea.
The entire thrust of Matan Torah was about shattering the great divide between the upper and lower worlds, namely that a physical creature should be able to climb out of his or her natural limits and reach beyond into the divine. As such, Jethro's personal odyssey, which, as mentioned, laid the groundwork for Matan Torah, mirrored this notion. He broke free of his personal limitations. After all, what made Jethro actually come? What compelled Jethro to shatter his personal limitations and join the Jews in a desolate desert? It was this idea, namely that Jethro was impacted in a way that he knew he had to actually come, to break free of his natural limitations, to give up his prestige as a Cohen of Midan, come to a desolate place and convert. This laid the groundwork for Matan Torah, when God shattered the great divide between the upper and lower worlds.
At the beginning of, thank you, Ron. At the beginning of tonight's class, we spoke a little bit about discomfort. We spoke about being uncomfortable and how from uncomfortable situations, usually we grow, right? And how very often in life, we're presented with situations where we find ourselves to be uncomfortable, and we shouldn't let that stress or that anxiety get us, because we should recognize that later on we'll look at this, and this will be a moment of growth. Certainly many of us can say this about COVID, right? There are many terrible things about COVID. We would never have chosen for it to happen to the world, but hopefully through this process, you're actually conscious of the fact that you're growing through it. Here's another challenge that I have for you. There's other moments in life. Not the ones when we recognize it's uncomfortable. It's the moments when we see discomfort coming. There's a new job. And you say to yourself, well, I'm making whatever it is, $50 an hour, $80 an hour. This new job will make me $85 an hour, $55 an hour, whatever it is, just a little bit more. But you know what I'm going to have to do in order to do that? I'm going to have to be uncomfortable. We choose very often to say, I don't want to be uncomfortable, therefore I'm not willing to go there, even though I know that discomfort will bring me to growth. I'm not going to go there because it's uncomfortable. I brought a very mundane example, jobs and whatever. Usually, very often we do that because we're like, okay, it's a new job, it's more money, it's more money, it's more money. But how often do we do that when it comes to our character development? We say to ourselves, this is a conversation that I know I need to have with my spouse. And then another voice pops up in our head and we say to us, and that voice says, oh, that's a conversation you have. That's going to be a very uncomfortable conversation to have with your spouse. And then you say to yourself, yeah, but I'm going to grow. And you say, I'd rather just be comfortable. I'm sitting here now, and all of you are laughing because it's obviously the most ridiculous thing. You should have the conversation with your spouse, right? When it comes to Yiddishkeit, we have the same thing all the time. We see something, it's Shabbos. Oh, maybe I should start keeping this additional aspect of Shabbos. I should stop driving to shul on Shabbos. I should stop eating out in non-kosher restaurants. I should start keeping this additional element of kosher. We say to ourselves, okay, I'm going to do it. And then somebody pops up and we go, but I like that sushi restaurant. And it's uncomfortable. I know I'm going to grow out of it. I know my Yiddishkeit is going to grow, but for me, I can't do it because it's uncomfortable. I know that it's going to make my life better. I kid you not. Today in Ralph's, I met a Jew. I have my shopping cart. He has his shopping cart. We're barely in each other's worlds. You know what I mean? We have masks. I have my earphones in, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, and he says to me, Shalom. So I said, Shabbat Shalom. Because it's Wednesday already. So I figured, why not? And he goes, not yet. You're jumping the gun. So I said, are you Jewish? Of course he's Jewish. He's from Montreal. He speaks Yiddish. The works, right? And as part of the conversation, I forgot what it was, because we were talking about Shabbos. He tells me, you know how jealous, he says, I don't keep Shabbos, but you know how jealous I am that you do keep Shabbos? It turns out he wants to be Shomer Shabbos. He wants to be someone that keeps Shabbos. Now, I didn't have time to give him this whole class, but if I would have given him the whole class. I would have said to him, what's stopping you from keeping Shabbos? Not where you are now, because you already want to keep Shabbos. Not where you're going to be, because there you're going to be very happy that you keep Shabbos. What's stopping you is that discomfort that's going to be in the middle. That squeezing that you're going to need to do to yourself to change, to step out of your comfort zone, and to actually become a different person. And that, my friends, is what stops us at every step of the way. That's the shell of the crab or the lobster that Rabbi Twersky was talking about. When the lobster starts to feel that its shell is too much, it doesn't say, all right, let me stop growing, and this is how big I'll be, and that's it. The lobster finds a safe space. Good idea not to do this out in the open, where there are predatory fish, etc. Find a safe space for you to do it. It climbs under a rock. It sheds that shell, and then starts to grow. And it grows, and then grows a new one with more space on top of it. And there are many of you here. I don't have many of you. I just want to throw this out there just in case. That you might be thinking to yourself, oh, yeah, that was that experience that I had, past tense, in my life. The lobster doesn't do it once. He doesn't do it twice. He's constantly doing it throughout his life. Every time we are squeezed, every time we're uncomfortable, every time there's a potential for uncomfortability, we should seek it out. We should seek that discomfort, because from that discomfort, we will grow again. And then look for the next stage. Once we're comfortable with this new stage, look for the next stage. And then we'll grow from that, because that's what it's all about. The title of tonight's class was Reaching the Pinnacle of Human Achievement and Beyond, right? Every time we lift our hands above our head, we stretch. So l'chaim to stretching, to finding uncomfortable positions. Stephanie didn't want to be left out. She stretched. Okay, good. L'chaim, to stretching out of our comfort zones and reaching beyond what we can with our mental capabilities, emotional capabilities, and actions. L'chaim.
L'chaim.
So was this the